My name is Kathy McCovey. I'm Karak. I live on the Klamath River. I was born and raised on the Klamath River. My great-grandfather worked for the Forest Service. My grandfather worked for the Forest Service. My uncle worked for the Forest Service. And I worked for the Forest Service for 40 years, and then I retired. Mostly because it was the only game in town. You know, they took the power for fighting fires away from the local communities. They took the management of the forest away from the local communities. So when I started working, I started out on a fire crew because it was easy to get a job on a fire crew, and I liked it. Any of you young people, honestly, think about working on fires. It's interesting, it's exciting, it'll give you big muscles if you're digging line, and you learn about fire. You learn how to stand next to it, you learn how to control it, you learn to work with it. I live in Happy Camp, California, and some of you people may have heard that we burned in 2020. Half of our town burned down, and we have a lot of people who are homeless now. A lot of people are camping in the woods, staying underneath the bridge. I never want to see that for another community. I never want to see a community burn like my community burnt. And that's one of the things that drives me to come and to talk and to carry the message of bringing fire back to the people and community back to the people, our community, our mixed communities. And they are the ones who know what to do in the landscape. They are the ones who should be managing the landscape. In Karuk country, because it's the Forest Service manages everything, the tribe has gotten together and we've learned how to work with the agencies. And we actually are starting to replace the agencies in some of the things that we do, the tribe does. Communities can do the same thing. You know, databases, be contractors, and just pick up that work. Firefighters, we have a community of firefighters, but we're excluded in fire managers and prescribed burners because apparently with all the qualifications and stuff, it takes it out of the locals' hands, and we want to bring it back. What I want to talk about is the pre-burn and the burn and the post-burn. And in a pre-burn, you need to have, in a lot of places, you're going to have that mechanical treatment. Nowadays, there's money coming in from the government and basically flooding California, and it's going to the fire safe councils, the money's going to the tribes. There are groups such as the North Coast Resources Partnership and the California Indian Environmental Alliance, and they help funnel the money to communities. And these communities, we want to build up the fire capability, both for suppression activities and for prescribed burning. But there's another thing that we'd like to do. Native people, we'd like to do the cultural burns. And that gives the why. In a lot of places, the type of plant species that want to grow there or that can grow there, fire can help retard those plant species or encourage them. And when I see the oak woodlands down here and the grasslands, it's very, very beautiful here. But I think about nowadays, and I never thought about that, what places will look like when it burns. And pre-burn, you can't, I see a lot of people that want to set fire and have a prescribed burn without doing any pre-work. And in some cases, in some instances, it will work. But in other cases, you've got, when you don't do that pre-work, you've got all the standing dead trees after you burn that you have to come in and take care of. So pre-burn is recon, planning, and permitting. There's a lot of upfront work to be done. I wanted to show this picture. This is me, and this is Lisa Hillman, and this is an unmanaged hazel tree. We can't do anything with that. You see these hats that we have on? We manage the hazel so that we go in and we cut them down. After we gather them in the spring, then we place the big sticks on top of the stump. And then the following year, in the fall time, we'll come back in and do an understory burn in this area. And that makes the basket material better. So, you see this down the timber? That Douglas fir has taken over the oaks, the black oaks and white oaks. This used to be a black oak stand. And fire, I guess what I need to say is when you burn an area, there are certain species that come back. And for managing for Native Americans in my area, Kruk, we like to keep the stage in the forb stage and the brush stage because those provide a lot of resources for us. And if you get back to the way in areas that Native people burned, they would burn from the village. And there was a study done up in New Orleans, and it was done by a friend of mine who worked for the Forest Service too. And she found, she studied all the fire records and found in a village site, which a lot of these towns are village sites, there was a 2-mile radius burned, and it was burned for fine grain mosaic. It was burned by the women, the men, and the children. So you've got a village, and you've got a 2-mile radius, fine grain mosaic. There was another 2-mile donut outside of that 2 miles from the village. So now you're out 4 miles. And that other 2-mile donut was for the men, and it was for clearing underneath the understory. It was for clearing along the trails. And oftentimes at that level, you're in the thermal belt of the mountains, so you're in your tan oak stands. Beyond that was a combination of lightning and Native American burning along trail systems and up in high country. So you have your whole area, your whole valley is being managed. So one of the things about managing for fine grain mosaic around your villages is that it's easy to do a burn in there. You already done your upfront work, and when you have that fine grass to carry it, you can do a burn in there either for cultural objectives or the Native people going into the stands and using the fire as a tool, as we always have, to manipulate the vegetation to provide the plants that we want and inhibit the plants that we don't want. As I look around, as I come down the coast from upriver, I see these beautiful oak woodlands and grasslands. And I see the moss coming off of the trees and the lichen on the white oaks and black oaks. I see the grass coming up from the bottom. The grass is meeting the lichen. So that means when there gets a fire in there, that's going to burn. It's going to be a ground fire, a mid fire, and a crown fire. And you're not going to be able to stop it. These grasses out here, they're going to carry fire fast. And up north, we found out about an east wind that's starting to come up with the climate change. That east wind that drove that fire down off of the mountain on a lookout, a power pole. The winds were so heavy in 2020 on the Slater fire in Happy Camp that it blew down a power pole, a line, and that ignited the fire. And the winds kept pushing the fire. It traveled, I believe when I was listening to it, it already traveled in an hour or 2 hours. It traveled 10 miles, and it was spotting 1.5 miles ahead of itself. That type of fire behavior activity, you can't stop it. You've just got to stand out of the way and let it go. I mean, you can even do cat line all you want in front of that line, in front of that fire, but you're not going to stop that head because it's got so much momentum. So you have to have pre-work. You got to be ready ahead of time. You've got to have your community ready. And we're all working together. And we need to have that ability to protect ourselves, to protect our families, to protect our houses, to protect our community and our way of life. Because I saw what happened to Happy Camp. I don't know if my town will ever recover, but my village will. My native village will, because the thing about a fire is it goes through and it cleans out an area. So to Native people, you've got a clean slate. You can go in there and manipulate the vegetation and start molding your burn fire area into what you want in the future. A lot of the work has already been done and been eliminated by the fire. This is the one I was talking about, understanding the forest succession. And what we're going to do, and what Native do, is we stop the succession. We'll keep it in a certain stage of growth by running fire through it, 3 years, 5 years, etc. You know, one of the things that I notice is we don't fight fire at night, or we don't work on fires at night. And a lot of times those night burnings are going to give you the conditions to do a nice, cool burn, to pre-treat your area, your oak woodlands and grasslands, because when that fire gets in there again, these fires don't act like they used to. And we don't want to see an area like this burn, and a lot of people living in the woods literally more than there are now. This right here is a marking guideline. This was developed for the Konk tribe and the Forest Service up in the Orleans Ranger District. They have a lot of areas that are just covered in advanced reproduction. They were planted trees of Douglas fir. They're even-aged, and they go for miles and miles. So now's the time to do a marking every 15 years or so. They come in and they used to just cut like every other tree or weak trees and leave the strongest trees. So they would have Hispanic crews come in, and they would pay them for so many dollars per acre to come in and thin out the Douglas fir trees. But you'd still have a pure standard Douglas fir. So one of the things about managing like this is a cultural prescription with the Konk tribe, like I said, in the Forest Service. In here, you've got a breakup. You're thinning out the Douglas fir, but you're also saving, you can see there's a legend right here. And sugar pine is a species that's being saved. Madrone, tan oak, looks like canyon live oak, black oak, and hazel. So those are all being identified to be left in an area. And after the cutting, after they go in and thin it, then they'll run fire through it. And so bit by bit, we're going to reclaim these totally homogeneous Douglas fir forests that have been planted after the logging of the area. These purple lines are creek boundaries, spring boundaries, water boundaries. This right here, this is my property that burned in a Slater fire. I inherited 2 cabins up on Indian Creek. And the cabins burnt. There's the remnants of them over here. You can see the mountains are all burnt. This white oak, when I went to work, I was working on a different fire. I was working on a red salmon during the 2020 Slater fire, but they took me up because I lived in Happy Camp, so the tribe and the Forest Service sent me up to work in Happy Camp. As soon as they cleared the road, which took a couple weeks so that we could start getting into our communities, about 2-3 weeks, I pulled up to my property, and everything was gone, except this tree. Now, I took this picture, I think, last year, but after the fire, this white oak was, it didn't even look like it was touched. And I looked at it in the acorns, because the Slater fire was in September, so the acorns on this tree were already ready. They were produced, they were hanging, they were well developed. All of the acorns on that tree were still there. And I looked at it, I was like, if you look around at that one picture of the August fire, you could see that melted metal. I had that too in my yard, melted metal from tire rims. But that tree, I thought that was the most fantastic thing. And it made me realize how important white oaks and black oaks are. in our native trees and our fine-grained mosaic area, because that allows fire to pass through there. Black oaks and white oaks like fire. They're evolved with fire. They're acorns like a bed of ash, so that they germinate in the bed of ash. These are trees that are going to be stay. They're fairly resistant. This one, it is stress. I don't know if it's going to make it or not, but it made it through the fire, and that was an inferno. So having oak woodlands and grasslands and having it managed. When a fire comes through, you will have some standing trees left. But if it's all Douglas fir, everything's going to be burnt. It's going to be standing dead, and you're going to have to deal with that. Right here, these are acorns. We eat a lot of tan oak acorns. If we don't burn, we get bugs in the acorns, and it renders them inedible. One of the things that people don't understand about Karuk region, for example, is that it's timed. Our religious ceremonies are ecologically timed. For instance, on the last day of the world renewal ceremonies, the medicine man goes to the top of the mountain, Field Mountain, and he sets logs on fire, and then he rolls them down the face of the mountain, it's a southwest facing slope. And at that same time, we know from generations that during that time of year, there's going to be rain. A little rainstorm will come through. And it always seems to come through after the medicine man set the fire. And it was about a week or so, and we're all going, yeah, it's going to rain. And people are saying, nah, that ain't going to rain. Sure enough, it'll start raining. But the thing I'm getting to with the acorns and the bugs is a thing that also happens that time of year is the moths are coming in to lay their eggs in the acorns. And the smoke inversion that is created from the medicine man rolling the logs down the mountain kills the bugs before they can get into the acorns and render them inedible. Also that time of year, temperatures are really hot and the Klamath River's running really low. And in the past, before we had these mega fires that give you 4 months of an inversion layer, the fire that the native people burned would put an inversion layer of smoke over the Klamath River, helping to cool it down. So that's when we ask about traditional ecological knowledge, that's kind of an example of, something's going to happen at a certain time. And if you do activity one way, you could pretty much predict the end result in the fire, in the forest and in the oak woodlands and grasslands and a lot of the environments we have. This is Happy Camp. This is Indian Creek in Happy Camp when it burned. This is planted trees from old timber sales, some of the planted trees, and some of them are just volunteers, advanced reproduction. It went through and it killed everything, but it left all the standing dead, and nobody's dealing with it. They want us to rebuild as part of the lawsuit against Pacific Corps. They said, oh yeah, we'll build you a house back. Yeah, you're going to build me a house back in the middle of this stuff, and it's going to burn again. Because from my experience, fire returns. Lightning or humans, there's thousands of potential sparks in that area, and it's dried, and when it takes off, they're not going to be able to stop it. Right there, this is ceanothus, one of the first plants that come back in a fine-grained mosaic. It's a nitrogen fixer, and it only lives, for a little while in your landscape, and then brush and other things will come over, and trees, and shade it out. So what we do is we keep our areas in a certain successional stage. And around the villages, again, it's a fine-grained mosaic. That is also a basket material. Ceanothus deer brush, tick brush, soap brush, they call it. It is used for the fine baskets for basket caps. And again, our plants need to be burned. Hazel needs to be burned and beargrass. There was a Konk tribal member who went to school for botany, and we're constantly, Konk people, going to school, doing science, like botany, and proving what our people have told us. Like they say, you have to burn beargrass, you have to burn basket material. And we were always asked by the agencies, well, can't we just cut it? And no, Erin Rentz, she did her master's thesis, and she did it on burned and unburned beargrass and hazel. And she found that the hazel that comes back after burn has less outer bark, and the cellular structure of the stick changes so that it can be twisted and woven. Beargrass also. Beargrass is a high mountain lily, and it has a blade just like a blade of grass. And I have a beargrass braided necklace. It has, if beargrass, you look at it, it's got a blade, just like a blade of grass, and it has a mid-rib on it if it's unburned. When beargrass is burned and it comes back, it doesn't have that prominent mid-rib vein. And again, it's kind of, it's not as thick, and I guess you'd say kind of has less outer bark too on it. The reason it's important, along with the reason you gotta have burned beargrass is if you're trying to weave a basket and you're using some kind of root, you're using two pieces of material and you're trying to put them together and make it look like one piece, and especially baskets that are watertight. So you have to have them fit flush. And the burning helps do that. It helps prepare the beargrass. It changes its cellular structure, and it makes it easier for us to use. We used to see this all the time downtown in Happy Camp. I have another house I inherited downtown in Happy Camp. I knew it wasn't going to burn because it's right across from the Forest Service office. So I was like, okay, I know they're probably in the bank. They're probably going to help protect these structures. But this, when I was little, I used to see it all over, right around my houses and stuff. And I don't see it anymore. But after the fire, I noticed it was coming up again. And I can't remember the name of it offhand, but this is the forb stage. This is the fine-grained mosaic. These are the type of plants that come up. And that's why we have short-term burn intervals, 3 to 5 years, is to encourage these type of plants that come in at this stage in time after fire to grow. Oh, look at the size of this one. My gosh. That's called deer potato. And I've been in an area, Shoshonic, we're burning that every couple of years. We've been doing it for the last 10 years. And this is one of the plants that comes up, Brodier species. Look how long that stem is. And when I was down at Shoshonic, we had Brodier down there, and I would dig it up. The bulb would be about that big. But after we started burning a couple of years, and I'd go in and dig it up, the bulb would be that big. You know, because when it was a little tiny, I was like, how can this sustain somebody because it's so small? You'd have to have a lot of them. But then I realized after I seen what fire did, I was like, yeah, you could eat 5 of those and some deer if you meat, and you'd be okay. So this is the garden that we have in many of the areas, and that exists around a lot of the village sites. Next. Soaproot. This is after soaproot in a fire area. Look how it comes back. Soaproot is an edible bulb. If you want to eat it, you can dig a pit and then put a fire in it on the bottom, cover it with rocks and sand, and then put another fire on top, put your Brodier or your soaproot bulbs in the bottom, and then you can roast them. You let them, for about 6 hours. Maybe sometimes for certain bulbs, you could do it overnight. And soaproot bulb does taste a little soapy, but it's actually pretty good. Over there, some new flowers. Actually, in those, most of the plants that come up after a fire, you can eat the bulbs. They're edible. This, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. This is part of Happy Camp before it burned. And this is Konk tribal housing up here. What I was able to, there are a lot of funding opportunities nowadays. And especially funding, if you can write your grant good, to go in and start working in these burned areas. So the tribe passed on this grant opportunity to me, and it was through the Indigenous Stewardship Fire Network. And I put in for it, and it was $50,000. And what I did, I hired 4 people. They gave us $2,400 for equipment. And we're going in these areas. When the fire went through there, because it was a fire that was caused by Pacific Power, after the fire, before the fire was even contained, you had Pacific Power workers going in there, working and cutting things. You know, we're fighting a fire over here, and all of a sudden this big entity of Pacific Power people show up and start working in the middle of the fire. And what they did is they cut down all the big hardwoods. They cut down, they were supposed to only cut 200 feet on either side of the power lines. They went out at least 400 feet and cut a lot of big oaks that really didn't need to be cut. So this area, what I got the grant for was to go in there, and the stumps of the big oaks that have been cut, the sprouts are growing out of the stumps. So we go in and we cut out the sprouts, and we have a couple of stems that we leave, maybe 4, that we leave in there, and then those take over the energy that's underneath the ground, and those will start growing faster. But you have to wait till about 4 years after the fire to go in and coppice hardwoods, because if you cut them out too soon, they'll get too limby. But if you do 4 years, then they've already established that beautiful straight bowl on it. So this is my project area up in here. And let's see, we're each getting $12,000 for the work in there. We have no target. We don't have an acreage target. We can just go in and do the work that we want to do. And we have tribal housing around here, so that's why we're spending a lot of time in here trying to work in what's already been burned. These are baskets that we make with a lot of the hazel that's burnt. And when I told you about the physiology of a hazel stick burnt, after it's been burned, see, we have to be able to bend them like that. And if they're not pliable, and if they're not strong yet pliable, they'll break. And again, this is, you can see in the back, there's younger Douglas fir trees. This used to be an oak woodland, grassland. There's some remnants of, this is right here, the stump. That's a black oak stump that was cut. At a certain time, the Forest Service came through, and it cut a lot of the black oaks in these stands because it wanted the Douglas fir to take over. So this is what it looks like when a Douglas fir succession takes over your oak woodlands grassland. And this is within that 2-mile donut that I talked about. Okay, so you got the pre-burn, do upfront work. We've got a lot of people around here that need to be put to work, a lot of opportunities, a lot of money coming in. The burn, that's what Diane and others are getting together, are these groups. When we work with the Fire Safe Council in Orleans, and it's called the Mid-Klamath Watershed Council. I'm one of the board members, and we also have the Fire Safe Council. And they're burning on private property. And we have the equipment, and we have people writing the burn plan. We have people working. Trex is a good way to get a lot of areas burnt. The Mid-Klamath Watershed Council is using Trex training, fire training, to work on private properties. And it's worked out really good. We've burnt a lot of private properties. These Trex programs, they're a way for firefighters to come and they'll get an assignment that they may not usually get. And you have to have a couple weeks assignment doing a certain thing like radio dispatcher, 2 weeks. And then you get qualified to do that. So we act as a training we act as a community that receives Trex participants who need training. We host them, and they burn the private properties. So I think that's about it. I'm back to the main slide. Thank you guys very much for hanging in there with me.